A retail giant is closing stores. Walmart plans to shut down 269 stores. Trump told Walmart to, quote, eat the cost of rising tariffs so they can keep prices low for consumers.
World's biggest retailer by volume and profit, that would be Walmart, warned today that it may have to start raising prices later this month due to President Trump's tariff policy.
By the middle of 2025, something unusual began to unfold across the United States. It wasn't a natural disaster or a stock market crash. It was quieter, slower, and yet far more unsettling. One by one, Walmart stores began to disappear from neighborhoods that had depended on them for decades. The familiar glow of blue and yellow signs, once beacons of affordability, began to fade from the American landscape. From the dusty suburbs of California to the frozen highways of Minnesota, entire communities woke to find their local Walmart shuttered, the parking lots empty, the windows boarded up. The closures weren't random acts of business realignment. They were the aftershocks of a political decision that rippled through every corner of American life. Earlier that year, the Trump administration introduced a sweeping new economic policy, reinstating tariffs on imported goods in the name of national strength and financial sovereignty. The rhetoric was bold: protect American workers, revive local production, end dependence on imports. But in practice, the policy struck a very different chord. Prices of imported food, raw materials, and packaged goods surged overnight. Frozen meats from Canada, soy and grain from Mexico, dairy products from across the border. Everything costs more. For millions of families already struggling to stretch their paychecks, the change was devastating. Within weeks, grocery bills ballooned, purchasing power collapsed, and consumers began cutting back sharply. For Walmart, a company built on the idea of high-volume, low-margin sales, the shock was immediate. When families buy less, the world's biggest retailer bleeds faster than anyone else. Its profits depend on scale, not luxury, the sheer mass of people filling carts every week. But as those carts grew emptier, Walmart's model cracked under pressure. By spring, the corporation began quietly assessing hundreds of underperforming stores across the country. And by early summer, the retreat had begun. In Minnesota, the blow landed first. The town of Grand Rapids had relied on its Walmart for years. It wasn't just a place to shop, it was a community hub. Families ran into neighbors in the aisles, seniors picked up prescriptions, and kids begged for candy at checkout. On August 29, 2025, that ritual ended. The store announced its permanent closure, leaving 200 people without jobs and an entire community without affordable groceries. The nearest supermarket was now 30 kilometers away, and public buses didn't even run that far. For elderly residents or those without cars, the loss was more than economic. It was existential. Experts began calling it what it was: a food desert. In plain words, it is a place where finding fresh, affordable food has become a daily struggle. But Minnesota was only the beginning. Across the country, the pattern repeated with eerie precision. Each closure followed the same economic logic. Rising import costs led to falling sales, which in turn led to corporate withdrawal. In the heart of California's Central Valley, the city of Visalia watched its Walmart go dark at the end of July. There were no protests, no outraged crowds, no breaking news headlines, just silence. The people there, mostly working-class immigrants tied to agriculture and service jobs, didn't have time to complain. They were too busy surviving. Visalia's geography made matters worse. The nearest full-service grocery store was nearly 40 kilometers away, and California's gasoline prices were already breaking records. Public transport barely reached the outskirts, and delivery fees often cost more than the food itself. Residents began adapting out of necessity. Families replaced fresh vegetables with instant noodles. Parents bought canned foods that could last weeks. Some started small gardens behind their homes, turning patches of dry soil into survival plots. There was no outrage, no rebellion, only quiet adaptation. And in that silence, something profound was changing. California, once the symbol of prosperity and innovation, was learning what scarcity felt like. Further south in Texas, the collapse took on a sharper edge. In Corsicana, a town 80 kilometers from Dallas, residents received devastating news in July. Their only Walmart, the economic heart of the city for 15 years, was closing. For low-income families, this was catastrophic. It was where SNAP benefits and EBT cards were used, where every dollar stretched just far enough to make the week possible. With that store gone, hundreds of families now had to travel over 60 kilometers for groceries, if they had a vehicle at all. For many, that meant skipping meals or relying on local churches and charities. Within weeks, food assistance requests at community centers surged by over 60%. Corsicana's story was not isolated. It was the echo of a growing crisis spreading through rural America. The tariffs, intended to protect the domestic economy, had made everyday essentials unaffordable. Soybeans, frozen vegetables, and packaged goods. Prices rose between 18 and 30%. People began cutting their grocery lists in half. Walmart's profits in low-income areas evaporated. And so, the company left, quietly, efficiently, and without looking back. Meanwhile, in Florida, the crisis wore a deceptive smile. The city of Venice looked serene on the surface. Palm trees, calm beaches, retirement homes bathed in sunlight. But in August 2025, its only Walmart closed, leaving behind a population unprepared for scarcity. For years, retirees had relied on that single store for everything: food, medication, basic supplies. Many of them no longer drove, and public transport in Venice was minimal. Suddenly, a short grocery trip became an ordeal. Local convenience stores doubled their prices overnight. Milk that once cost $3.50 is now sold for nearly $6. Fresh produce became a hot luxury. Seniors on fixed pensions started skipping meals to afford medication. Delivery apps might have offered a solution, but for an aging population unfamiliar with smartphones, they were useless. Behind Florida's idyllic facade, a silent emergency was taking shape. Inflation, fueled by import tariffs and rising port fees, hit essentials hardest. Internal reports revealed that the price of imported packaged goods had climbed by nearly 50% since the start of the year. The ripple effects went beyond food. They began reshaping real estate. Retirees reconsidered living in towns where affordability was no longer guaranteed. The illusion of Florida's surveys conducted in July revealed the human cost behind the statistics. 60% of Joliet residents admitted they had been eating smaller portions. Many had stopped buying fresh produce entirely. For some, dinner had been reduced to bread and beans. Public transportation in these neighborhoods was unreliable, forcing residents to take long, expensive rides to find groceries. Seniors and disabled citizens faced impossible choices: spend money on food or save it for medicine and fuel. By the fall of 2025, economists started calling it the Great Retail Divide. Wealthier regions with dense populations kept their stores. Poorer areas were systematically abandoned. The places that needed Walmart most were losing it fastest. Tariffs, inflation, fuel costs, and logistical bottlenecks merged into one storm. And at the center of that storm stood an uncomfortable truth. America's affordability model was breaking apart. Across small towns and suburbs, the transformation was visible in subtle ways. Half-empty kitchens, parents stretching meals for one more night. Local charities are overwhelmed with requests. Communities that had once relied on global supply chains were now realizing how fragile that dependence truly was. A single policy shift in Washington had turned into a nationwide reckoning. The disappearance of Walmart wasn't just an economic story, it was a social one. It revealed what happens when the systems people trust the most suddenly vanish. The low-cost empire that once fed a nation had become too expensive to sustain itself. In that irony lay a chilling message about modern America. By winter, questions filled the air. Was this the end of affordable retail as the country knew it? Would another company step in to fill the void? Or would America learn to live with less? No one knew. But one thing had become painfully clear. When the last affordable store in town disappears, the dream of convenience disappears with it. And in parking lots once filled with life, where families once loaded groceries into their cars, only the wind remains, carrying with it the echo of a country that thought it could always buy its way out of hardship until the shelves went dark.